of our national instrument.
Featuring 5 of the nation's super bands, plus the talented young band.
Experience the power and passion of Desperados,
Shell Invaders,
Massey Trinidad All-Stars,
First Citizens Supernovas,
and the pride of the South, Fun Play. Saturday, July 11th.
at the iconic Grandstand, Queens Park, Savannah.
Save $100 and get your early bird tickets at $200 until Saturday, June 27th.
Get yours now. Available at islandetickets.com.
At Crosby St. James,
All Kenny Sports.
All Extra Foods Supermarket,
Westby, Tagarigua, Athletes by the Park.
Jumbo Foods Barataria,
GAC Electrical, opposite Starlight, Tiggermarkton Main Road.
Mirage Westside Supermarket in Arima.
And all participating bands. Presented by Super Pan Man, Dane Gulston and Friends. For more info, call 732-3402.
Generations of Steel.
In every victory, there's a story. In every defeat, there's a lesson. And behind every headline, there's a truth waiting to be told. Next week, veteran sports journalist Andre Batiste takes you beyond the scores, beyond the medals, and beyond the controversy in a special multi-episode series. The good, the bad, and the ugly of sports in Trinidad and Tobago. Hear from some of the nation's top athletes, administrators, coaches, and the biggest names in local sport as they share their triumphs, challenges, frustrations, and hopes for the future. Airs Wednesday 10th to Friday 12th at 2:30 p.m. Only on WESN, the content capital.
WESN.
I'm not just a scruffy-looking nerf herder. I am a scruffy-looking equal opportunity critic. Sean Michaels, this is talking about WSN, the content capital, and that last part is the most important part. I find it interesting how people will assume you must be pro one side or another based on what you say, not understanding or appreciating the fact that there are some people who try to remain neutral, especially, and here's the thing, if you are a member of the media providing analysis on things, you either declare your bias up front and then, you state it, people know who you are, what side you lean, and they judge you accordingly, or if you're not going to declare bias, people are going to assume you're trying to be unbiased, you're trying to be neutral, and then you have a responsibility to carry out such. What I find interesting is how people determine what unbiased is. Unbiased is, I don't criticize your side, apparently, for some. That's what unbiased is. Unbiased is, I don't criticize anybody at all. Unbiased is, I give everybody a mile and a half of chances, as opposed to calling it how I see it. The thing is, we're in a situation where we don't really have time to pussyfoot around, beat around the bush, play the fool. And in fact, it brings up a whole other issue about neutrality. One of the aspects of our political process that I very much dislike, the vulnerability of our news industry, which to some extent, in various ways, you could say that the industry in a whole is not perfectly unbiased, right? Editorial agendas as an institution that trickles down to a whole media house might not fully exist as you would assume it to be. But to say that media is mostly unbiased in TNT, it's hard to say that. But then you could go a step further. It seems as though it does not pay to be neutral in TNT. Now, if I wanted to earn the monies, then in theory, because I don't know how easy this would be to do or not, in theory I should sell out, pick a side, and say everything good about that side does nothing wrong, and say the other side does everything bad. And in theory, that's how, as a media personality, you make money in TNT. That's how you get supported for certain programming, whether it's mostly, I guess, social media. And that's how you cement yourself with at least one segment of the population, get public support that could translate to other things. And it makes the whole situation of politics pretty ugly, because it's not just media and commentary, but there are a lot of situations where it is perceived that life would be easier if I pick a party, and you would more or less pick, you wouldn't really have much of a choice. You'll pick the party that is the stronghold holder. If you're in a PNM area, you pick PNM. If you're in a UNC area, you pick UNC. And you stick with that party, and you go with the ebbs and flows of politics. So right now, if you're a PNM person, things might be a little bit rougher. And then you wait, and then when the PNM wins, things will be a little easier. And you go through the cycles, right? It seems as though even UNC members who are only in government for at least up to this point, only so many terms, right? Only, look, this term, and then 10 years ago, you had the partnership, and then there was some time before that, you had Basdeo Pandey, and so on and so on. It's not like it's half and half historically. It might end up being that now. That might be the trend moving forward. We'll see if it's 2 for 1 or 1 for 1. But when you look at it, it seems as though even with the ebbs and flows, our political system has perfected the process of wealth extraction. Now, then it makes certain situations very tricky, I think, because how do you, as a responsible adult, attempt to try to affect positive change? Now, I'm trying to affect positive change by doing this. This only goes so far, right? Maybe it will grow. Maybe it will grow into something bigger, but that will take time. And regardless of how big it is, it will never directly affect things like policy decisions, things like the economy and crime. It will only be indirect influence at best. At best. Which leads to the situation with Dr. Margaret Rose replacing General John Bates in the Senate as an opposition senator. And it's a situation where she herself, there's an article, I'm a little bit behind on this, 4 days ago, where she speaks about her neutrality and, more importantly, her decision to now enter into politics. And it's very interesting, because now how is she going to be viewed? Because we have yet to see anyone successfully come into politics and not have their reputation damaged in some way, just at minimum by association. Think about it. Everybody that essentially was part of the Dr. Keith Rowley administration in any capacity will always have those questions of, why didn't you fix crime? Why didn't you fix this? Why didn't you fix that? Weren't you there? Now, it's not necessarily so simple, right? Some of the Johnny-come-latelys, they didn't really have much of a say on major policy decisions. But at any day, they did decide to opt into that situation. And to some extent, they put their name alongside that situation. They put their name with all the other names involved on the policy decisions. They put their name in the mix with all the other names involved that are attached to whatever controversies happen once they joined in. And to some extent, by joining, you also indirectly imply approval of what happened before, even if you weren't there. Because you're saying, I know what happened before, it's not that big of a concern for me, I'm going to join. And generally speaking, what do we see with people who enter politics? Well, they get richer. If they weren't bombastic before, they become extraordinarily bombastic. Their parliamentary behavior tanks, it goes into the gutter, much less their general political behavior. And they align themselves, whether slowly or quickly, with the party line, whatever the party line is. Now, the situation in PNM is a little more unique than normal. It's a little different than normal. Because after the defeat, where you had a complex, convoluted Rube Goldberg machine of succession planning attempts that did not work, you are left with an opposition that, by several accounts, is not unified and is right now undergoing an internal power struggle, which every now and then, what might be clues and indicators and hints and Freudian slips reveal themselves to the public. You know, like when certain people who get other senators fired go on and, well, this is my assumption, go on and do well, let me not say that. Because of course that whole situation with the committee into the pharmaceuticals and the former Minister Dayal Singh's testimony, that whole thing was a fiasco. But one of the issues is the remedy to the situation has probably not actually solved the real fiasco. We just don't know the inner workings involved. But the replacement is someone that is apparently coming in with eyes wide open. And at the very least, she's saying what is necessary, not that it's going to absolve her or insulate her or shield her, but she's saying the mandatory first steps, that is the bare minimum, in my opinion, when opting into a situation like this that is tricky and potentially can lead to your reputation being tarnished through no fault of your own in her case, in that I'm saying she doesn't actually have to do anything for the politics to harm her. She observed that now decision makers within both administrations are challenged and there's an urgency. There is an urgency, and I think what is not said is that we don't see our politicians treat with our needs with the sense of urgency required, because the moment demands urgency. Quote, I have been trying to write consistently to raise some of the issues, but I think the time has come for me to do more and try to make a contribution from a different angle. I have done it in the courts, through my teaching, my research and writing. Now I want to see how I might do it through influencing how laws are made. Which, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure if the business of political parties are writing laws. That's like a byproduct of their real business, which is winning elections and political bubble. That's what their real business is, to be honest. What do they produce more of? Political bacchanal or new legislation? I would argue political bacchanal. That's their day-to-day function. That said, it is understandable how she's framing it, the way she's framing it. And notice, she's tried to influence things in other ways indirectly. And now she's saying, this doesn't seem to be working, and I am identifying the need of urgency. Maybe I should go and put my hat into the ring, put my name in the mix. Do things directly, go to the source, see if I could fix it from there. Quote, we are in a moment in history, not just locally but globally, very true, where there appears to be a crisis in political leadership, and as a citizen, we have a sense of not having hope for our children's future. That those we have elected to serve have the people's interests, or we have a sense that they don't. The public interest first. I must confess that it is what appears to be the flagrant disregard of the procurement legislation by the current administration. Honestly, I'm not a politician. I've never seen myself as such. I'm an advocate. I am a teacher. And I am what I hope is a right-thinking citizen who wants to see the system serve the people better. Maybe what we need now are people with little political ambition, but a strong desire to see the country prosper for all and the ability and willingness to serve. If that is true, well, first of all, yes, I agree with that statement. The question always is, how do we identify said people to know who to support? Is Dr. Rose one of them? Like I said, she's saying what she needs to say at the start. Because then, and this is one of the key things to me, acknowledgement of reality. She noted that the PNM suffered a serious electoral defeat, which was a message from the people. Quote, any serious political institution must listen carefully when citizens speak in that way. Something which I think, essentially, once you get voted into office, you stop. And ironically, you're voted out of office. It takes time for you to transition and start back, potentially, listening carefully to what the citizens have to say. Although, on some level, I'm not entirely sure if either party in opposition really did this, or more listened to what citizens have to say to see what they could do to advance their agenda, or what they could exploit. But she goes on to say, I believe the PNM now has to do the hard work of repair and renewal, which is an interesting thing to say, because that implies or identifies the fact that whatever they've done within the last year has been insufficient. And I would argue that for the most part is true. I have seen improvements, it is not sufficient. The rehabilitation of public perception of the political party that is known as the PNM has in many ways been delayed, stunted, has been impeded by some of the actions and words of some of the very members who right now hold central positions in the PNM. It is what it is. If you don't like it, tough. You lost the election for a reason. Go cry me a river somewhere else. Tough lessons need to be learned if you actually want to improve. You can't just take the easy route and say it's not my fault. It's always somebody else's. No one else was in the driver's seat. And not all of it could be attributed to Dr. Keith Rowley, as much as he was the man in charge, and a lot of it is his mess. Not all of it. She went on to say, I accepted this appointment because I believe I can contribute to that process. I also believe the opposition leader's call for renewal is important. Her calm, deliberate, and inclusive leadership style can help create space for serious rebuilding. This is technically true, in the sense that she does have a calmer style. Now, is it effective? Does it meet the needs of the moment? That's a different debate. That's a different debate. Some people will say, no, she does not meet the needs of the moment. No, her style is not effective in our system of politics. I am somewhere in the middle on that. I think it's a shame that we assume that to be the case. I think it's a shame that on some level we complain about these Wajang politicians talking a whole set of nonsense. These Wajang politicians saying a whole set of crap in Parliament. throwing out all kind of personal insults, the likes of which should never be recorded down on the Hansard, and some of them probably are. These disrespectful politicians that ignore the people. You know, you have a prime minister having gun talk in CARICOM and gun talk to foreign cartels and gun talk to foreign governments and gun talk to protesters and blah, 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 blah. And then when you have someone that doesn't do that, oh, well, she doesn't have enough charisma and personality and she's not fiery enough. We complain about the fieriness of Dr. Keith Rowley. Some people complain about the fieriness of the current Prime Minister. I will forever complain about the ridiculousness of one Minister of Public Utilities. I'm not saying that the opposition is perfect, and she very well might not be the person to usher in a new age into the country. She might be just another politician. But I find it interesting that literally, because she doesn't conform to the norm that we all complain about, well, obviously she's not good enough. What? You want change, but everything that as a nation, as a population, we say and do implies we vehemently do not want change. So now, of course, Dr. Rose, she's joining a party. To what extent does she have to play the game? To what extent does she genuinely believe in Penelope Beckles as the opposition leader? To what extent does she genuinely believe she can affect change in the system under this leader, with this slate, with this party? To what extent will the internal politics look at her as a threat and she'll get nowhere at best and have her reputation tarnished actively by people smiling to her face, shaking her hand, but rhetorically stabbing her in her back? To what extent will the government attempt to sink a newcomer with a pre-existing reputation who's starting off saying certain things that challenges the status quo? Politicians don't want the status quo to be challenged. The status quo is what allows them to extract wealth. However you interpret that, the phrase extract wealth, I leave that up to you. They extract wealth. I think that's politically correct enough to say. I'm not saying who is doing the extracting. They are doing the extracting. Because I think essentially there are two types of people that enter into politics. The vast majority, the ones that have political ambition, that have their own agenda, that want to either, one, have more power and enjoy the trappings of power, and or two, enrich themselves. They want to extract wealth. That's the vast majority. And then the minority is the ones that I want to do good, and usually that is beaten down and beaten out and cast to the wayside. But here's the thing. We can't afford the former. Because the implication is, within the last 11 to 12 years, extracting wealth at the expense of. Well, when we were rich, we take in money from a large pie. We as any politicians. Now that we're poor. And we're not just poor, we're poorer than we were yesterday. That's what a GDP growth of 0.8% means. Our economic activity, the business that is Trinidad and Tobago, the corner store, the local restaurant, the grocery, right? The business that is Trinidad and Tobago is less profitable today. Our market share has shrunk. Our market share is shrinking. Our revenue streams are shrinking. That's what that growth means. It's not just actual government revenue, but it's gross domestic product. We're talking nationwide now. We can't afford the excess of yesterday. of the foolishness of times gone by. We need serious people to start to take over, and it's going to take time. It's going to be a process, and the pre-existing conditions are not going to silently fade into the night saying, you know what, you're right, we need to take a step back and let actual people with some degree of ethics and good judgment take over. No, they're not. In part because they are far too arrogant to think that they are not capable to rise to the requirements of the moment. The problem is they don't realize part of the problem is they misidentify what the moment is. It is not just a lack of ability, but also a lack of judgment with regards to what does the country need and how do we meet those needs. Because our politicians, they are not practiced in solving problems, they are practiced in political bacchanal. That's the skill that rewarded them. Essentially, think about your workplace, whether you're retired, so your former workplace or workplaces, or those who might still be working in their current workplace. How many people get promoted due to merit, and how many people, in your experience, get promoted due to brown-nosing and office politics? And you're like, how did this person get promoted? Because they felt safer, they sounded safer, they were more marketable, they were more presentable, they were better talkers, they were more convincing, they were better used car salesmen, not necessarily the most technically proficient, the most technically skilled, the most knowledgeable, not necessarily core to the reason why the company makes money, but they have convinced the people who make said decisions that they are the ones who know what's best for business. And with regards to the good ship that is TNT, those people that make the decisions are the voters. We don't have meritocracy in general. We know this. We shouldn't act surprised if someone calls it out. So the thing is, Dr. Margaret Rose might be the start of a process, but here's the cruel reality. She might, if she is, the start of this process. Affecting change on this level potentially means not only will she be vilified for it, but she won't actually be able to see it through to the end, because one, it'll take too long, and two, whatever political capital and goodwill she has probably will be spent long before that change could come, and the system will chew up and spit her out and cast her to the wayside, because it's done so with people before, right? It's done so with people before. And there are certain situations in life where dedication to duty and courage is tested in a way that most of us will never have to face those tests, because essentially you are working to build something that you yourself will not enjoy, at least not directly. In situations like this, if you want to fix the system, more often than not, the first person to jump into that battle in good faith and to wade into those waters with good intentions, they're not going to survive at the end when everything is fixed, and then now we get to see the country run properly. And that's assuming it's successful. And it'll take more people along the way. It'll take more people along the way to see this thing through. And there will be other people who might have to sacrifice a lot and not be there at the end as well. And it's a really hard thing, essentially, to ask somebody, because subconsciously, that's what's holding our young people with good intentions back, whether they know it or not. The sacrifice is too big because the task is so big. It might not even be fully fixed within the lifetimes of some well-meaning activists and thought leaders in the country. So why bother? Why bother going into this situation and attempting to do something that is a taller mountain than Everest, a greater challenge, seemingly, than anything that their life has to offer them, to what gain? Because in theory, if you are doing it in good faith, and if you are doing it correctly, there is no profit incentive here. You're not there for wealth extraction. There's no one giving you an attaboy, pat on the back, take a bag of money and go your way when it's all said and done and you've used up all of your political capital and you no longer have the capacity to continue. There is no rewards in theory at the end of this tunnel, except potentially seeing positive change. That's it. And again, it might be a lifetime before the mission is finished. And in the meantime, personal satisfaction, can't pay bills, can't feed a family. Trust me, I know. And again, it's assuming that Dr. Rose is saying everything in good faith. And she's on the up and up and she means what she says. I have no reason to disbelieve her, but the cynic in me is basically saying, all right, we have to see where this goes. Because in part, all of everything that she said could be derailed through no fault of her own. But I think we need to understand and owe it to ourselves. Yes, we need to ourselves have both eyes open and to scrutinize everybody. Every new politician should be scrutinized. But the point is, we need to do a better job of trying to identify those who are there to collect a check and those who are there to make change. Because notice, we've been talking about what needs to change and what needs to change in this country and how this country is doing this and how and what's going bad and what's going wrong and blah, 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 blah. What change have we actually seen? Oh, we've seen state entities change out employees. We've seen financial priorities shift. But what, as an institution, as a nation, have we seen changed? Oh yes, technically we've seen the murder rate go down. Has the police service, have we seen any significant positive change in the service? Have we seen it? No. Have we seen any significant change in major systems of governance and government bureaucracy and administration and oversight? No. Have we seen any major change in legislation for pick any issue? Even with all the legislation that has already been passed, the answer is no. Stand your ground legislation. What has stand your ground legislation done for us? What has it done for us? Tell me. On a statistically relevant level, not a one-off anecdote. What has it done for us? All of this pomp and fanfare and trumpets and rhetorically speaking with regards to stand your ground legislation, amounting to what? Amounting to nothing. So, at the end of the day, Dr. Rose said it best, and this is a hard decision that potentially many people have to make. Who knows, maybe someday I will be afforded the privileges of having to make it, and I hope I make the right one. And it's not to say that one direction or the other is automatically the right one. But in her estimation, she said, this was not a time for me to be neutral. I hope and pray for her success. There's not a lot of hope left when it comes to governance and politics. Some people might still have wool over their eyes, but I have seen enough to see business as usual. It's just a different flavor of condiment. It's still an unhealthy condiment. It's still something our doctors supposed to be saying, eat less of that, especially as you get older. Unfortunately, we do the reverse. And then wonder why it is we have all these NCDs. Because our ketchup is too sweet and our mustard is too artificial. And it doesn't necessarily promote a healthy lifestyle and a healthy body, because you are what you eat. And if you consume junk, then your body will turn to junk. Our political system right now is essentially the equivalent of modern unhealthy foods. Or they could say that they're fat-free all they want, but the reality is that just means there's a ton of extra sugar in it. And that's leaving us with diabetes and obesity and heart conditions and so on and so on. That's what our politics are doing to our rhetorical bodies. Because one could argue that Trinidad and Tobago is an overweight diabetic with a heart condition that can't afford all the medications it needs to keep this thing together. Because we could have afforded the medication in the past. That was all of the inefficient spending for nonsense to keep a lid on Pandora's box. But now we don't have that money anymore. Pandora's box is open, apparently. In so many ways. In so many ways. And we're trying to close the barn door long after the horse has bolted in the form of things like SOEs and extra taxes and the like. But that doesn't work. That's why the last administration didn't necessarily do it. Not that they had a better alternative answer. No. We can't afford the medication, and we don't want to get healthy. We don't want to eat better. We don't want to exercise. So politically speaking, we're that 600-pound individual that they need to get a crane to lift out of their bed to go to the hospital, but we know that at some point we're going to die young. No pun intended. So forgive me, I hope that when a new chef enters the kitchen, we, the public, perhaps might support that. Throw support in for promises of change. Throw support for intentions to affect things in an urgent and necessary way. And if those intentions prove to be false, well, it will correct itself. We just have to keep our eye on the ball and not be lazy and say, well, hey, but then we trust so-and-so to do it? No. Maybe she just said things to the cameras, but I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt as a newcomer now. As an example to say, why don't we support that, but actively monitor the situation? And if it proves to be false, well, then we could stop. And if it proves to be true, then perhaps we should not just continue, but push harder. Our politics has successfully eroded any sort of genuine political activism. Arguably, the last time I saw any real hope in our political system, it was at the start of the COP. Think about how long ago that was. Let's take that break. When we come back, we'll get into the SOE once again as the justifications have come out and the debate continues. And of course, we know it's going to happen. But we'll debate it anyway, because that's really all our politics is good for, going through the motions of the dog and pony show to say that we actually have any sort of potential consequence to the debates that we carry out. If you think that there is any actual consequence, I would argue that is somewhat of a naive position given what we've seen the last however many years to be. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
In every victory, there's a story. In every defeat, there's a lesson. And behind every headline, there's a truth waiting to be told. Next week, veteran sports journalist Andre Batiste takes you beyond the scores, beyond the medals, and beyond the controversy in a special multi-episode series. The good, the bad, and the ugly of sports in Trinidad and Tobago. Hear from some of the nation's top athletes, administrators, coaches, and the biggest names in local sport as they share their triumphs, challenges, frustrations, and hopes for the future. Airs Wednesday 10th to Friday 12th at 2:30 p.m. Only on WESN, the content capital.
Trinidad and Tobago, get ready for a musical explosion of freedom, culture, and pure steel band magic.
Featuring 5 of the nation's super bands, plus their talented youth bands.
Get ready for generations of steel.
The ultimate celebration of our national instrument.
Featuring 5 of the nation's super bands, plus their talented young band.
Experience the power and passion of Desperados,
Shell Invaders,
Massey Trinidad All-Stars,
First Citizens Supernovas,
and the pride of the South, Fun Play. Saturday, July 11th.
at the iconic Grandstand, Queens Park, Savannah.
Save $100 and get your early bird tickets at $200 until Saturday, June 27th.
Get yours now. Available at ICNTT.com.
At Crosby St. James,
All Kenny Sports.
All Extra Foods Supermarket,
Westby, Tagarigua, Athletes by the Park.
Jumbo Foods Barataria,
GAC Electrical, opposite Starlight, Tiggermarkton Main Road.
Mirage Westside Supermarket in Arima.
And all participating bands. Presented by Super Panman, Dane Gulston and Friends. For more info, call 732-3402.
Generations of Steel.
To women who have problems trying to get aroused, women
Loss
who
of
have
libido.
loss of libido, and women who have problems actually trying to achieve an orgasm. Something as simple as that. So all of those things tend to happen a little bit further along after the hot flashes and the night sweats, but they are real symptoms. They do exist, and they get pushed under the rug quite a lot. So they are commonly underdiagnosed. They're underreported, they're underdiagnosed, they're undertreated.
And we're back here. This is talking about WSND Content Capital, and I do have to wonder how do politicians craft the things they say to debate each other. I find it, to be honest, it's at a level I would expect a student. And not even a good student. It has to be like a below average student. Because potentially speaking, if some of the debate points were utilized in a classroom setting, at least half of the class would point out the fact that you're not necessarily making that much sense. Because we have a state of emergency, but we also have the situation with the young child's death that has been in the news this week. And what I spoke about this yesterday, but I'm going to reiterate it again today. And I guess it's, to some extent, this is because another media house has an article, and it's offering, I think, different perspectives or point of views or reports on different things that I might not directly spoken about yesterday. The Prime Minister has criticized the PNM for expressing concern about children after failing to protect them during its decade in office. Honorable Speaker, I continue to be astonished by the temerity of those on the other side. Today, very concerned about our nation's children, because when they had the opportunity to do so, to take care of the children for the past 10 years, they failed to do so. Here's the thing. I'm not entirely sure to what extent the opposition was just blaming the government. But I do know that there is an undeniable fact. As one caller pointed out, children seem to be dying. Like every couple of weeks, another child dies in an extremely tragic way. And essentially, at what point are we still going to blame the PNM for certain things? If you want to blame the PNM for certain economic realities, fine, because we're talking about very tangible, direct, easily to attribute, easily traceable, long-term situations. But the fact of the matter is, and it goes back to what I said yesterday, the SOE didn't save the children that have died recently, so why will a new SOE save children in the future? Make that make sense, please. Because at the end of the day, I don't care who stops it, you know. I don't care who solves it. It doesn't matter to me. The solution could be yellow, the solution could be red. Do you think I care? Because our politics has indirectly attributed a cost to human life by essentially putting politics above the needs of a society to safeguard human life. By turning the debate on what is the best course of action to prevent killings, by turning that into political fodder, as opposed to giving it the attention, the respect, the consideration, acting with a sense of urgency that such a situation deserves. Even the crime talks that the president called for a couple of years ago, there was more concern about how to blame the other side about not joining in on the crime talks than either side actually trying in good faith to participate in such an endeavor. Because apparently their time is far too valuable to do something as inconsequential as maybe coming to a bipartisan agreement on how best to deal with crime and how best to deal with the murder rate. So when people want to say, but what did you do about crime when you was in office? Hey, on some level, one, when you were in opposition, you more or less behaved in a similar manner when there was an issue by which both sides were equal participants. That's point number one. Point number two, what they did is what they did. They paid the consequence and are still paying the consequence for what they did. But hey, you lost an election but still acted as opposition, not so? Twice. At some point, you trying to tell the opposition you shouldn't be talking right now. I don't know if these geniuses have figured out the fact that when they lose, whether it's 4 years from now, 9 years from now, 14 years from now, 29 years from, 19 years from now, whatever, that will eventually be used against them. Whatever you lose next, the first thing that'll come out of the PM's mouth is, you shouldn't be talking right now, you lost. Leave that for the public to determine when the opposition should and should not speak. Because it is the public opinion on that matters more. As the political opponents of the opposition, your opinion on when it is pertinent for opposition members to speak, that's kind of stay in your lane. That's not your lane. It's not. You don't have a right to say that because you wouldn't want it to have been said to you when you were in opposition, because you would have called it undemocratic then. Now, we have adopted a whole of government approach to safeguarding children. All right. And You know what that is? That's buzzwords that means nothing. That's what it is. It's a buzzword that means nothing. I mean, listen, this phenomenon exists even in first world militaries. Political buzzwords to get everybody on the same page, to market an agenda, even down to the American military. Politics gets in the way of actual practical solutions. Why do you think we are some special snowflakes that are going to be immune to common human feelings? Now, the opposition chief whip is calling on the government to immediately end the SOE, present a credible crime fighting strategy, or step aside, describing the measure as a national sham and a political hoax on the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Here's the thing. Technically speaking, he's going in the direction. I agree with the direction. Do I agree with how far he went? Now, on some level, it's one of those things where it's not like he's doing a good job of trying to lie. He's not trying to lie. He's potentially trying to speak to his base. He's trying to speak to the people who are most upset. And he's making very strong statements. It's a national sham. It's a political hoax. I think it's too far. I don't know if it's effective for every member of the public listening. I wouldn't have done it that way. I wish it was different. In part because there are far too many people in the population who are holding out hope that the situation could improve, which ironically, when you think about it, doesn't help the government because they're looking at the people holding out hope that the situation will turn around, saying, you see, they still approve us, they approve of what we're doing, we're going to continue doing what we're doing. Ironically, it'll be those same people that eventually, when they've reached the point with regards especially in crime and this repetitive SOE situation, once they realize, hey, this is not actually a solution, it will never actually solve the problem, and there is nothing to coincide with it or coming after it that's going to even pretend to be an actual solution. Those very same people whose lack of a complaint the government is looking at and counting as approval, that's going to turn to hate. And that's how you get voted out of office in the manner which the PNM did. Just saying. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I think the situation in the unions are more or less turning out generally where I expected it to go. I'm not going to say that I had all the details right. But slowly but surely it's getting there. Slowly but surely the government can't help itself. The government does what all governments do. Talk about the previous administration as being evil and then repeat more or less what they did, with sprinkling a little caveats to try to look different here and there. I mean, to some extent, that's what the PSA was for. That probably was part of any quid pro quo that might have been. Be our advocate. I mean, effectively, that's the result. The result was when a union leader campaigns for you, it gives you the appearance that labor on a whole approves of you. And then it puts all of the other unions in an interesting situation because at the very least you fracture the joint labor movement. But with regards to the whole SOE situation, the most important thing that the opposition chief whip said was, present a workable, coherent crime plan to address crime at its root causes. Because this state of emergency is nothing but a national sham and a political hoax on the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, I said I agree with the direction. I agree with the direction because the state of emergency, as presented, is somewhat disingenuous. Now, it is having a positive effect on crime. But does anyone think that if the SOE ended, it will permanently remain where it is? And let's be real. Let's be real. I think part of the reason why the Prime Minister is upset with the protesters is because she campaigned on a tough against the law platform. And now there's a controversial police shooting, and what she's supposed to do is she's supposed to switch gears now and say the alleged criminal was a victim and blame the police. She is the tough on crime Prime Minister, right? This is what happens when you don't actually know what you're talking about. When you take positions based on political convenience and not based on any sort of real guiding principle. That's why they don't have a crime plan. The Minister of Defense said himself, a state of emergency is not a crime plan. If you are operating with any sort of guiding philosophy, any sort of foundational principle on what crime fighting is supposed to be, on what the responsibilities of the National Security Council and the Cabinet are supposed to be, if you were informed by any sort of idea that had any relevance to the situation, you would at least do more than just slapping SOE on top of SOE on top of SOE in a manner by which, and I said this yesterday and probably before, seemingly is against the spirit of the law, bypassing the requirements of continuations of SOE. To the point where they wanted to have zones of special operations, SOE light. Or it will be so much better than a state of emergency. For all intents and purposes, a state of emergency. Because they don't have a crime plan. Because the Minister of Defense basically said they don't have a crime plan. Because all they presented to us is an SOE. And it's renewal. That's it. That's all they got. And defense attorney, former defense attorney, Minister of National Defense, an SOE is not a crime plan. He said it. It's in Parliament. It's part of the Hansard. It's part of the public record. You like to say things with parliamentary privilege? Good luck. That is part of the record from a member of cabinet. Central to this thing. Now, the Attorney General had something interesting to say. And there's a part of me that wants to throw a lot of sarcasm at it and call it ridiculous and agree with the opposition chief whip to some extent. Now, he said it's a vile, divisive, and politically selective contribution to debate with regards to targeting big fish. I wouldn't necessarily go there because I don't know whose big fish is financing who. Let's just put it that way. I suspect there are big fish financing both sides, but I have no idea. I literally don't. With that said, I find it is somewhat laughable that the AG is threatening to go after white-collar criminals. And here's why. The vile, wicked PNM, evil PNM, potentially sent police officers to Barbados to bring a citizen forcibly back to Trinidad without going through the proper procedures to do so, thereby potentially violating his rights to the extent by which the Bayesian government more or less conceded the matter, and our own government conceded parts of the matter. So there are already areas of this issue that are not under dispute. That was done under the so-called wicked, vile, evil PNM. And now that the good, benevolent, majestic UNC has come into power, where is the accountability for that situation? It's being investigated, you say? Or at least it was at one point in time? What has come to fruition from said investigation? We're not talking about one of your own did something. We're talking about your political opponents did a thing, a public thing, utilizing regional and national assets and personnel to do this thing. If you can't investigate the Brent Thomas affair to account to the nation, how am I supposed to have faith that you could investigate white-collar criminals? But then you're going to say, oh, we don't actually do the investigation. The police do the investigation because the police are independent. Nice. So then don't tell me that you are going to go after white-collar criminals. Either the police are independent, or you're admitting that you have influence over their proceedings more than you should, or you're making some new investigative body and changing fundamental aspects of our law. Which one is it? Because I can't believe in such a statement, and there is literally no accountability on the Brent Thomas affair. None. We ain't even reached the Joshua Stamru shooting. But you know what? That's fine. You'll protect your own. We understand that. We understand, as negative as it is, as corrupt as it might look, whatever. That happened under different administration. What you're protecting, what you're hiding, what you're keeping from us. If it is the government has the capacity to go after white-collar criminals, then I would expect that the government has some capacity to go after wrongdoings done by the government under different administration. We had a commissioner of police, regardless of her capacity, her ability, and her track record. We had a commissioner of police arrested, yet nobody could tell us what exactly was she arrested for. We get some, I can't say what I want to say. We get some nonsense about a description of potential transgressions that no one could point to a law that was broken. What is the accountability for that? Because it's a new administration that is not beholden to the loyalties of the past. Or maybe they are. Or maybe there are two sides of the same coin. We have no accountability for that. But yet you're going to go after white-collar criminals? Or is it, here's the real question, or is it that you're going to use the state of emergency to justify things that you couldn't do without the state of emergency, that potentially might be less than legal, or determined to be less than legal when the state of emergency ends, and we might end up, I don't know, with a hell of a set of lawsuits? Or it's just talk. Because here's the best part, here's the best part. Here's the best part. The Prime Minister, we've had a state of emergency because threats against the government. Then it's, well, crime. Then it's crime and threats against the government. Then it's crime again, no more talk about threats against the government. And then, in a state of emergency that is meant to protect the children, you know, to protect the children, don't mind the fact that the state of emergency didn't protect them in the last couple of months, but somehow this new one will. This new one will, right? And then, as if, it's almost like if the AG is like, they're not buying the jive, we need to add more jive to the equation. White-collar crime, yeah, that's what we're doing now. We're going to go after white-collar crime with a state of emergency. Where in the state of emergency does white-collar crime justify calling a state of emergency? Someone please explain this to me now. We're debating a state of emergency, right? How is white-collar crime, is it that bad? Is the corruption that bad? Because the thing is, here's the thing. If the corruption is that bad, well, the UNC is in government right now. For corruption to be that bad and you need to call a state of emergency, something tells me the opposition is not the one. The opposition is not the one extracting the wealth right now. Not when all of the so-called PNM people were removed. So exactly what is the emergency level of white-collar crime that warrants its inclusion in a state of emergency debate? That's like the two parents talking about how the family is going bankrupt. But then one of them is like, but the walls need to be painted. Now is not the time. You want to talk about white-collar crime? Find a more appropriate platform to do so. I thought the state of emergency was a violent crime. I didn't realize that bankers are the threat to the government. Is that it? Is it that financial institutions are not giving you sweetheart deals? Is it that business owners are complaining about taxes and fines, and you're saying, how dare you complain about taxes and fines? You're going to find some white-collar charges to throw on you. What is it? Because as a state of emergency, right, what is the emergency in white-collar crime that warrants its inclusion to justify this debate? I would like to know. I didn't realize that a state of emergency is the UNC's crime plan. Once again, the sheer inconsistency and self-contradiction is incredible. What is the justification of this SOE extension now? I've lost track. At some point, what? Is the sun going to be the justification for the next extension? What's it going to be? I don't know. Whatever random reason. Coconut trees falling on minister's car in the beach. Is that going to be the next justification for an SOE? What's it going to be? State of emergency. A temporal legal situation where a government suspends normal constitutional procedures to handle a major crisis. I didn't realize white-collar crime was such a crisis. If we're debating an SOE, let's debate the SOE. I mean, you want to say all crimes should be included in an SOE debate? All right. What about illegal parking? We should include that? Why don't we include that in the SOE debate then? There's too much illegal parking and speeding and reckless driving. Reckless driving causes loss of life. We should declare state of emergency for reckless driving. You know what we should declare state of emergency for? Lack of body cameras. That's what we should declare state of emergency for. Lack of body cameras. No, we're not going to do that. That will make the government look bad. The government not going to do that. So when the opposition chief whip asks the question, present this country with a workable crime plan. And if you cannot do so, get out of office. Now, out of context, I'm like, that's a little too far. Why had I go so far? Because you're going to lose some of the people that you're speaking to. You're going to lose part of the public going to such an extreme. But then, the infinite wisdom of the Attorney General comes to the forefront. And I am left thinking, maybe Marvin Gonzalez is right. Because this seems a little ridiculous now. Why is it that every time there's a ZOSO bill or national security measure, we get contradicting or random left field arguments that are not always pertinent to the discussion at hand? Or we get the government themselves basically admitting that some of the arguments and talking points that they have brought forward in whatever issue is being debated is untrue, or they undermine it with their own words and actions. Because again, an SOE is not a crime plan. That came from a member of the government himself. So the opposition chief whip has all the rights in the world to say, what is the crime plan? Present a crime plan. Please remember, when Fitzgerald Hines said, it is not my job to have a crime plan, everybody criticized him. Everybody. How could he say that? Now are we going to just put our head in the sand and say, well, you know, it's understandable that the government doesn't have a crime plan now? Listen, if you want to be technically accurate and follow proper procedures and all of that jive, then do so from the start. Don't do so selectively. Me, I'm going to hold this government to the same standard I hold the previous one too. Those who don't like it, well, that's not my problem. You want to have a state of emergency. What, at this point, what for? What for? What is the emergency? Because technically speaking, you can't tell me that crime is down, but you need a state of emergency to continue to prevent crime. Then is crime really down? Or are you admitting to the fact that this is all temporary gains? It will not stand up when the state of emergency is removed. That is the implication. The implication is you are acknowledging with every extension that the state of emergency has limited effectiveness. That you need preventative detention orders because you do not have the capacity to actually investigate criminals and charge them under the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. You need something extra. You need a cheat. You need a cheat code because you're not good enough. You don't have answers. You're wasting our time. That's what your own actions and words imply. An SOE is temporary, but there's no end in sight. I thought Marvin Gonzalez was kind of being a little ridiculous when he said we're going to have 5 years of an SOE. And then the government is basically saying, that's okay, we'll prove him right. Give it time. Because now this SOE thing is like what EILA was to the PNM. How are we going to get off of this runaway train and not look like idiots? That's basically what it is, right? We can't fire EILA because then we have to admit we were wrong when we hired her. We can't stop the SOE because if crime skyrockets, then we look foolish. And apparently we do not have confidence that the TTPS and various arms of law enforcement can deal with crime without the state of emergency. All the gun talk in the world, all the gun talk in the world, all of the baddest police officers and the tough guys and the Punisher patch, we need to suspend rights. We all of the joint operations and experience working with the Americans and how successful we were in the past without an SOE. But we need an SOE now, right? We need an SOE now. We on this side have kept our promise. We declared a state of emergency in July of last year due to an impending existential threat to the state, which was being hatched and or ordered and arranged from within our prison system. We dealt with that threat with the full force of the law, with the full force of a state of emergency. Well, if you dealt with the threat already, why you still fear it now? Because the same source of the crime and the murders, the gangs, were the source of the threats. You dealt with the threats already. Did you deal with the threats already? I don't know, you know. Because everybody you remove from maximum security prison, from what I understand, a lot of them were on remand. Were they charged with anything? Or is it we're going to be under state of emergency for the next 4 years because that's the only way you could safeguard your own lives? And the question is not if there's a threat, but assuming there is, why exactly is there a threat against this government? We have a remoney line. Caller, good morning. You on here?
Sure, Michael Small, good morning.
Morning.
I want us to do a little assessment on the way forward and where we are right now. Because to me, right, Parliament has descended into a state of one-upmanship rather than the people's business. So instead of the debating the bill at hand, they're debating how I better than you. And why is it doing that? The quality of life of Trinidad and Tobago has not improved at all. Because Whenever the physical quality of life index, right? Which the three main measurements is infant mortality, life expectancy, and literacy. You see those three rates? You're not seeing it. And when it was the indicators of quality of life, level of crime, diet and nutrition, poverty, pollution and the environment, social services, Trinidad and Tobago regressing. And on top of all of this regression, the government, as much as they patting themselves on their back, what is the economic strategy concerning drug and gas and energy? Because we cannot just keep pulling gas from these same old tire fields that we have. It's time. The second thing with this SOE is the PDO. Now, the kick about the PDO is this. The person says are alleged criminals, right? No evidence. So you have gang leaders, you have car thieves, you have drug pushers. All right. But for years, we have alleged corrupted politicians. You ain't see a PDO for nothing. Currently, we have people saying, no, many parliament with matters. You ain't seen nobody tell them, step aside and clear yourself until nothing at all. But I want to leave you with this. We have some candidates for Joke of the Year. Yeah. I have it written down there. The first candidate, the Public Utilities Minister using the race card against the trade unions. The very same trade unions who put him where he is today. The second candidate for Joke of the Year is the pre-action protocol letter sent by a government minister to opposition MP. Now, the fact of the matter remains, wasn't the deceased Danny Guerra incarcerated on that PDO? And the third candidate, they say crime down, right? But in the last 10 years, how much perceived threats we had against the lives of government ministers? Versus no. That and if we were within that afford, which is this ban on where you could march and protest. Because as far as I see, UNC was created out of marching and protest because them come from the trade union movement. And sad but true, none of the MPs today seem to remember that. Like they forget where they come from. So if you don't know where you come from, how are you going to know where you're going? How are you going to know who you are? Their job, for me, is to make sure that they go a better place. So when citizens call and ask a question and somebody tell you, well, for the past 10 years, what do you do? Or what do you say? The initial purpose of you being in power is to change what was going on in the past 10 years. So you making an irrelevant excuse for not doing anything new, but doing the same. Watch me, we in serious problems here. And I think it's time that we form some kind of watch group, advocacy group, to lobby for what is right, for what's supposed to be done in Trinidad and Tobago rather than what is passing now for party politics. Because party politics killing Trinidad, corruption killing Trinidad, crime killing Trinidad. When you want the state of Trinidad, you go want to come here as a tourist? Really and truly no. So I put a prayer for the ministers and in their thinking now, because nobody really put in country first. When I watch at all the groundwork that Stuart Young did, it's time the government get a team, pull a team from the PNM and call Ms. Rodriguez and sit down and have a discussion with these people I don't understand what is the ego to say, well, it's I do it and I do it. At the end of the day, this is Trinidad and Tobago. This is we, no I and we. There's no I in team. Have a good day listening off here. Good program as usual.
Thank you, caller. I'll say this up front just to address that last thing first. I don't expect the majority of the PNM to have the maturity to work with the government. Let's just be real, right? It takes two to tango. Let's be real. I have seen nothing from either side, generally speaking. Can't speak for maybe some individuals. I have seen nothing from either side as an entity to say that either side displayed anything to indicate there's any willingness for collaboration and doing the work for the benefit of the people and putting that to the forefront and not putting the one-upsmanship, not maintaining that as the main raison d'etre. It's almost like if governance is secondary, managing the country is secondary. Schoolyard, cuss-outs in parliament, that's what they're there for. That's their most important function. We have another caller from Marima. Caller, good morning, you're on the air. Caller, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Now, I hear they saying crime down. Crime can never be down because it's every day is a murder. Every day somebody getting killed. So how they could say crime down? And I hear the government, I hear the Prime Minister saying that they have people to protect the children. They will get something in place. But it's not only protection, you know. They have to get the right set of people to protect the vulnerable children, right? Because, example, it had children in a home long time before now. It has so much of children left the home and run because them said people, them said workers in the home interfering with these children and them. So I just hoping and praying that they do get right people, right thinking people, decent people to take care and do what they have to do for these vulnerable children. You understand? It has some children in the home, their parents die, they are in the home, and workers interfere with them. It has some children left the home and gone, and I think it has some again, 2 or how much of them die out there. Right? Because of the interfering in the home. So we have to think about that. And Sean, I would like to know when the 12-year-old, when is the funeral for the 12-year-old? I've been looking and you know, I want to know when is the funeral. I'm not hearing anything about it. So could you please fill me in on that, please? Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. That might be private. I'm not sure if that's something that would be reported on, and I'm not sure if, even if it was reported on, if it would be open to members of the public. I'll be honest, if I was in that family's position, I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned about the wider debate. I'll leave that for other people to be worried about that, right? That's the job for the media, that's the job for concerned citizens, that's the job for analysts and commentators. Their job is to see to the needs of their family and to put their child to rest. And I would imagine that for the most part, the expectations would be it would be private. But to some extent, I don't even know, I'm not well versed in the process of identifying and then taking custody of remains from a crime scene. So there's that as well, right? What the forensics and investigation process is, if they still have the body, if they're done with the body, you know, I don't know, right? One thing that has come out with that is apparently, well, the headline says it's a PH driver. The headline says PH driver. but the article doesn't necessarily state that directly. So I guess, I don't know, I still don't know if it's an assumption. It said private car, so, but it's one of those things where it is a scenario that, even if it's not directly attributable, perhaps it speaks to a scenario that's very real and very possible. And it's one of these situations that needs to be addressed. It's one of these situations that needs to be addressed. And I'm not saying it means that all PH cars need to come off the road tomorrow or today. This is one of those weird things. It's like, just because you say you need a solution, the solution isn't, it's not demanding, oh, no, we need to wipe it out, whatever it is. We need to completely do a 180 for whatever the issue is. It's very easy for the public to kind of come to that conclusion as a collective, because it's difficult to have complex rational thought as a collective of multitudes of people with individual perspectives, and things tend to be oversimplified, and whatever is the path of the resistance gets through. But solving the problem is more, what is your solution in order to ensure that things like this are less likely to happen to the fullest reasonable extent, as minimized as possible, because it's impossible to ensure that it will never happen. All you could hope to do is minimize the amount of times it can happen as much as reasonable possible, right? Limit it as much as possible. Get it as close to zero as possible. Zero is statistically impossible. You might end up with years where you get zero, but on some level, there's a little bit of luck involved with regards to a whole host of factors of the human condition, which at the very least law enforcement cannot control. Let's take the comments if we can. Good day. I believe the continuing SOE is a deliberate distraction from the government's inability to deliver on their promises. Thus, the SOE is being pursued to stifle the inevitable dissent that will arise. I'll say this. I could see why you would have that interpretation. And this is one of the reasons why I think the government is not being smart with what they're doing. I don't think this was the roots or the beginnings, the origin of the SOE, right? From what I understand, there were threats against the government. Now the big question is, why is it always this prime minister seemingly has threats against her that an SOE needs to be called? And listen, there might be some bad implications for the PNM. I'm not necessarily saying that's impossible. I'm not saying don't go there. But on some level, what is the common denominator with regards to threats against the government within the last 15 years? That's the first question that you have to consider. I am not saying that the answer must be what the statement implies. It's an open-ended question. But also, the PNMs technically, yes, the opposition leader Kamala Prasad Bisesa called for it, but the first SOE to deal with crime happened in the PNM, right? Now, there was a period during the election where we didn't have an SOE, where the murder statistics stayed down. I was pleasantly surprised by that. However, arguably, at the beginning of the year, in between the previous UNC SOE and the current UNC SOE, I think there was some multiple casualty events, and our SOE was recalled again. And part of that SOE being brought back included threats against the government again, which then makes the whole thing about how we solve the problem with threats against the government. Here's the thing. So I don't. Let me just get. We dealt with that threat with the full force of the law. Did you deal? But you didn't solve the threat, I guess, because the threat reoccurred, right? And then, of course, they also included high crime. Now they have the whole you can't protest, which, here's the thing. My speculation is that the stifling of dissent is more of an opportunity rather than a plan. I don't think this was part of the long-term planning. In part because most politicians don't think long-term. They have proven that they are seriously deficient. I'm talking both sides of the aisle here. Seriously deficient when it comes to long-term political strategy. Really, most politicians are, right? Even the dissenters, to be honest. They dissented and it's like they didn't have a plan, they didn't think it through, and they kind of went where the winds blew them, right? For better or worse, and for their individual careers, potentially for worse, we'll see. So I think it's an opportunity that, A, we have a mid-year budget review coming up, and we have people protesting about a police shooting. You know what we can't do? We can't say that the Ministry of Finance is a sensitive building, and we could also include that in the no protest zones. So, is it a distraction? No, I don't think it's a distraction. I think it's an admission. It's an admission of the government's inability to deliver on their promises. We had stand your ground laws promised, and it was heavily implied that firearms would be more efficiently made available. Not necessarily more available, but it would be, the process would not be as difficult and as long and as slow and as arduous, right? That was the heavy implication. Why? Because the Prime Minister said, well, if you don't want a gun, you don't have to have a gun. Lo and behold, the Commissioner said, who tell you I give out guns? I can't give out guns. I have a problem with gun crime. I also have an inability to differentiate between illegal firearms and legal firearms. So, like my predecessor, I need to put a handle on, put a clamp down on private firearms. Because I can't control illegal firearms. You want me to control private firearms out there in the wilderness too? Look at all of the crimes reported from legal firearms. We can't risk the escalation. Heaven forbid a homeowner actually defends themselves with a legal firearm against a home invasion in this country. I don't want to have to deal with that paperwork as Commissioner of Police. Funny enough, the Commissioner of Police seems to be more concerned about potentially facing queries about his approval of firearms to members of the public, but has no issue with regards to putting police officers in situations where they could easily be accused of wrongdoing and having to face that music. Oh no, we have no problem with police liability. It's the liability of the firearms approval that bothers him. I guess because his name would be on each individual approval, as opposed to, technically speaking, he cannot be held personally responsible for what the officers do. It's an admission that they are incapable. That's what it is. Because when you have police press conferences talking about the state of the situation, right? Because it's not like the government does a lot of press conferences anymore. Oh no, no. And I wonder why. Why does it feel as though the UNC, who had Monday night rallies every week and then press conferences in the middle of the week, all of a sudden, they don't seem to be engaged with the media as much as they did when they were in opposition? I wonder why. All of a sudden, you can't see the Prime Minister. For all we know, all of these tweets and Facebook posts, they were crafted by a minister in the ministry in the office of the Prime Minister, not by the Prime Minister stuff. We don't know. We don't know. All of the gun talk might come from somebody else. We don't know. It's an admission that they don't know what they're doing. The thing is, no one's accusing the PNM of having better ideas. But when people are saying bring back Hines, the implication is this situation is worse than what we had before. And some people say, well, how is it worse? How could it possibly be worse? What could possibly be worse than Hines? Listen, by some estimations, by members of the public, it is. They are more than happy to go back to that. Perhaps you should maybe ask yourselves why people have that perspective. To some extent, the grass is always greener. And to some extent, in the opinion of some, this situation is worse. How could that be, you might ask? Well, crime is down. We still need a state of emergency to deal with crime. Threats against the government have been dealt with. We still need a state of emergency to deal with threats against the government. Oh my gosh, there's a syndicate. We got this almost a year ago. There's a syndicate of gangs and transnational criminal organizations because the threats against the government was in part formulated in the prisons by the gang leaders, right? So the gangs have come together in a syndicate to threaten the government. Oh my gosh, look at this thing. But if that's the case, if they came together from the first state of emergency, why is there an alarm about gangs or the talk of gangs unifying now in 2026, June? If last year there was talk about a syndicate and threats against the government because the gangs came together, how is it alarming now that there's calls for the gangs to come together now? It's almost as if the gangs are saying we never actually allied last year. That syndicate talk was a pack of rubbish. And what rubber stamps that theory is the fact that the government is saying, oh my gosh, the gangs are now talking about coming together. You claim that they did that last year as part of the justification of the state of emergency. Do you understand the nonsense coming out of your mouth right now? I don't know if I've ever seen the PNM blatantly contradict themselves to the degree of which I see this government do so on a regular basis. The Auditor General thing was its own unique snowflake thing, and the merit list, we understand the Prime Minister then at the time was trying to be a smart man and he failed, right? It is what it is. I'm talking about unforced errors in public utterances. What is it? What is the direction of this country? Someone please tell me. Because Karen is right. How are we going to have an international financial center under state of emergency? We complain about travel advisories. Do you think those travel advisories are unwarranted now? Which means any talk about tourism is out the window. And maybe that's why the PNM didn't want to do this whole state of emergency song and dance. Because they knew the implications. Now again, they didn't have a crime plan either. But tourism, the longer this goes on, tourism potentially, what was left of foreign tourism is now guaranteed to die a slow death while this is going on. How do you tell people, yeah, it's safe, they're just under state of emergency for violent crime. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, there's threats against the government. It's safe there, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. The thing is, you could go, Americans could go on spring break into Mexico because they're isolated from the crime. Or isolated enough. Mexico's a big country compared to us. We're a small country. Right? We drive by hotspots to get to and from the capital. Think about that. Technically speaking, the perception is hotspots in our nation, you have to drive past them to get to the capital from anywhere east or south of the capital. And then now, if you want to go west of the capital, you invariably have other hotspots, or at least zones where gangs operate and live and have had gun violence and attacks and murders. Which means in between all of the gated communities and 1% communities and big mansions and houses, a short drive away, you'll get a crime hotspot. A short drive away, you'll get a situation. And then how do you tell tourists, oh no, you'll be fine. It's safe. It's good. I mean, think about it. Tobago is watching its crime situation slowly grow. eventually we won't even have that caveat of Tobago is safe anymore at the rate we're going. San Fernando in line. Caller, good morning. You're on here.
Morning, Sean.
Morning.
I listened to the Attorney General yesterday in the Parliament. Let me reiterate. I am in support of continuing the state of emergency. And I'm saying that, and let me explain myself, because the police has shown themselves that they cannot control or bring crime under control in Trinidad and Tobago with regular policing. So this, as I said this in the beginning, this was the last tool in the toolbox that they took, that they have taken on. And it seems as if it have no coming back from this, because there is the police service seems not to be able or capable of this is going to be their crutch now. The state of emergency is their crutch. And they are afraid, because nobody wants to go back to 2024 with 624 murders. And they are afraid, and the government, if they do not have a state of emergency, the murder rate going to climb exponentially again. So in that sense, I am in support of it. However, if you look at the detention orders, I don't know if you have read. I have read most of them, and all of this is based on intelligence. It's the same intelligence apparently that the U.S. government gave Mr. Jeremy. So now the new excuse is going after the 1%, using that as the excuse. I'm certain that this will not be uttered by him or them outside of the Parliament. Because if the U.S. government have that type of information, they would have already had had extradition warrant for these people to move them out of Trinidad and Tobago. So it is laughable. It is clear now, by any state of emergency, that the government really don't know what to do with crime. They don't. And it is time that they go and get some international help and assistance for themselves to come up with strategies, and for the police to reform and take this police service into the 21st century. The police service has proven themselves incapable of controlling crime in Trinidad and Tobago. That is just the case, and we are where we are because of that now. So don't expect anytime soon, Sean, for this thing to stop. This is going to go on for the rest of the year. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. And I just want to say, before I say anything else, I agree with the caller. Notice I never said that we should end the SOE now. I think the opposition chief whip said we should end the SOE now. I never said that. Just like how I never said Kayasili is innocent or guilty, Joshua Samuel is innocent or guilty, the police officers are innocent or guilty. It's how the situation is handled with regards to that shooting. It's how the SOE has been handled. It's how the justifications, the reasoning, the logic. Because the bad logic, the bad reasoning speaks to the lack of a plan, speaks to the lack of ideas that Mr. San Fernando was talking about. And I believe that's more or less what he was saying. And if not, then I'm adding it on. Right? Because he said the police, the government, they don't know what to do. And the sad part is they are misusing the state of emergency. They are misusing it badly. And that's why they're stuck. That's why they're stuck. And if I could see it, how many of them with all of their degrees and all of their experience and all of their knowledge and all of their so-called brains, because I'm fairly certain at the very least right? Everyone's favorite arrogant Minister of Public Utilities would love to tell everybody how stupid they are that disagrees with him. All of that brain, why can't you actually see the fact that Minister Sage is technically correct? He can't say something right at least twice a day like a broken clock. The state of emergency is not a crime plan. What does that mean? It means the state of emergency is buying you time because the murder rate has dropped. Don't mind the fact that, hey, Western Division said, well, murders and crime is down, but certain crimes are up and crimes are fluctuating. And we have more or less milked the state of emergency for what it's worth. It is doubtful that the murder rate will drop any further in any significant way. I think the Western Division had said, well, it's one less murder this year compared to last year or something like that, right? That's not statistically relevant. It's not. I'm sorry, it's not. If it was 2 and it dropped to 1, then that would be statistically relevant. And certain other murders like break-ins and theft and fraud are up. So crime is just figuring out ways to try to avoid the challenges that a state of emergency presents criminal enterprise. That's all. And eventually they're going to figure out the boundaries. And with an 11% or less or worse detection rate on murder, eventually the murder rate can slowly trickle back up. Just give it time. Give it time, right? State of emergency is a short-term measure to buy you time to implement long-term measures. But we're not seeing that. Because at the end of the day, what is the key thing that Mr. Sanford has said, that we've been saying all the time? The police can't deal with crime. But I'm not going to assume it's because the police are all stupid. There's a lot of stupidity at the police, especially potentially at the top. But a lot of it stems to issues with the criminal justice system. So what I would think would be fairly obvious. But it's funny, maybe politicians don't want to fix the criminal justice system because then if they do, they can't extract wealth from the country to line their own pockets. Maybe that's why. I don't know. We all assume they're all corrupt, right? Now, to me, the obvious yet not easy solution to crime, it starts with, currently under state of emergency, wasted 9 months of it, wasted. Complete waste. You have a state of emergency. It reduces the murder rate. It gives the police the ability to use PDOs to detain individuals. It buys you time to fix the system so that people aren't dying while you're in the process of fixing the system. First step, legislation. You got to fix the criminal justice system on a legislative levels, particularly with regards to laws when it comes to burden of proof, evidence, with regards to anti-gang legislation, etc., etc. There has to be certain efficiencies with regards to investigations and collecting evidence, because we always had intelligence, but we can never turn intelligence into evidence. Why? Now, some of it can be procedural in the sense of we're not necessarily going to make it so that it's going to be unfair prosecution and persecution, but we're going to potentially make it that the situation for the police officers are more practical with regards to the requirements in order to collect evidence and to charge, right? Whatever those deficiencies might be. Some of it could be police procedures that are done in certain way because of certain laws. Fine, we could figure out what things could potentially be areas to fix and then put things in place to start fixing them from legislation. And then, of course, that's the first part. Then you have to go to policy decisions, strategic decisions, like selection of senior police officers, police executive members, although you don't necessarily get to go back to that apple, right? You get one bite, and then you have to wait for certain things to happen before you could go back to it. But things like that. And then, of course, now, the ministry, certain procedures and regulations and so forth, to what extent it could be changed. I would argue that the framework by which the police executive or the police is run under the executive, that probably needs to change, because I don't think it's practical or tenable, to be honest. Not just because of the current commissioner himself being a waste of time, but because it was probably never practical or workable to begin with. And the situation with the commissioner of police, not just this one, but the one before, exposed the deficiencies of the situation. It is what it is, right? And of course, you have to start from the legislation. It goes all the way down to police procedures and regulations and standard operating procedures and so forth and so forth. But also what the government could do is budgetary allocation. But hey, certain people need to go on retreats. Certain people need to have parties. Certain people need to have security when they go to carnival fetes. It is what it is, right? We have threats against the government, but we could go fetting. Just think about it, huh? Just think about it. There were threats against the government last year, and then there were still threats against the government this year, and in between, people went to big-time fetes and made public appearances on stage. That'll be some real good security. Probably cost a good penny too. Right? In part, we're paying for the Commissioner of Police debacle. That you could maybe say started with the whole Stephen Williams things. I'm acting, I'm still acting, I'm still acting. Right? And then some things were, you have to be fair, some things were fixed under Gary Griffin. I'm not going to say all. But that whole meritless thing, whatever was wrong with the Commissioner of Police position, it was just, that was the final nail in the coffin. McDonald Jacobs was a good caretaker. It's not on him. The meritless fiasco led us into the last two commissioners of police, and you saw what happened with that. Right? And I don't think the police could turn things around in the current commissioner. I think we're long past that. I also think we're soon to be long past the point of the current Minister of Homeland Security being able to turn things around. People are going to potentially start to view him like Fitzgerald Hines. They just want to see him go. The rate he's going, that's where he's going to end up. Maybe he could turn things around. It's not there yet. I don't know. I think, however, we're past that with the Commissioner of Police because he does not have a pre-existing reputation, a pre-existing positive reputation to push back against public complaints and criticisms. Let's take the next comment. Good day. Have we been given information on the numbers detained, charged, and prosecuted under the previous SOE? I believe the public has a right to know. I think we were, but it's not clear because I think there was a comparison. There was one report I saw recently. There was a report recently that compared the last government SOE to the current government SOE. Take this for what it's worth. I'm seeing here on Google, law enforcement executed 332 preventative detention orders between the start of the state of emergency and early June 2026. The thing is, not all were charged. Only a fraction were charged. There was a report that there were 42 new PDOs, but 332 since March the 3rd. Yeah, I don't think that they do a good job of collecting and organizing the data and presenting the data. In fact, even, well, one of the issues is, it seems like, because I remember seeing this, I can't remember if, right, the commissioner and DCP Martin, the media house couldn't contact them to get the answer to one of the questions that you asked. Junior Benjamin, he's administration now, right? He could not say how many were charged how many of the people that were held on the PDOs were charged. That is going to be more pertinent the more people being held on the PDOs, because in theory, once the SOE ends, if they're not charged, they go free. And then, if they were held under PDO under the SOE and not charged, and then when the SOE ends could go free, potentially we end up in a situation like we had in 2011, where you get lawsuits that stem from that. And at 332, some have been charged, right? But it's still going to be a couple hundred who potentially will sue the state, and depending on how many win, it might be a couple 100,000 per lawsuit. And that was for the 2011 SOE, which, you know, it was only so long. I think we've reached the point now where we've been under an SOE for much longer, or at least for longer. I can't remember how long it was back then. It was for a few months. Well, I don't know if we, I think we just went for one period. We might have had 2 renewals. But potentially, depending on how long these individuals are being held under the PDO, if the court decides that they were being wrongfully detained for an extended period of time, blah, 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 it could compound the payouts. It could add to the monetary financial value of the damages that the state will then be forced to pay. And here's the thing, some of the payments made for the 2011 state of emergency detentions that were deemed to be not so on the up and up, let's put it that way. Well, it's the PNM that had to pay it, not the UNC, because again, you have issues with the criminal justice system and the judiciary. That's one of the other things. To what extent can you solve the situation in the judiciary? The government is not proven to be smart enough to actually attempt practical solutions at that, because in their infinite wisdom, they increase the number of courts to put increased burden on the office of the DPP, who was understaffed even before they increased the number of courts. But oh, the Prime Minister wants to protect the DPP from the mean and evil protesters. Oh my God, those protesters, they're so mean, so evil. Protesters. Yeah, but when it comes to actual staffing levels, so that, you know, they could meet the requirements of the job, especially when you increased the requirements of the job, no news about that, right? No news about that. So much support for the office of the DPP. So much support for the office of the DPP. So, we are more or less reaching a point now where the government can't talk about PNM and crime anymore. Not because the PNM did, you know, we shouldn't tell the opposition, you all failed at crime. No, we can tell the opposition they failed at crime. It's just that when the failure level is starting to become equivalent, it's kind of useless to say, well, but they failed. Yeah, but you're failing. So, I don't know what you're talking about, Willis. Please help me out here. How are you more justified in your failing state to speak about how they were failures then? We know. By your own words, you can't even put a coherent narrative with regards to justifying the state of emergency. What am I supposed to think about that? These are so many things. I don't know if the PNM ever contradicted themselves. I'm sure they contradicted themselves. I just don't know if they ever contradicted themselves quite this badly. And let me end with this, with regards to, because the first caller from me spoke about one-upsmanship in Parliament. Here's the thing. It was always there. That's what Parliament was even in the last administration. The difference was, I think, when the PNM was in government, they tried to be a little bit more subtle with it. They tried to limit themselves to some extent, It doesn't mean that they weren't doing it. They were just trying to hide it a little bit more. But to be honest, when you look at the actual results with regards to legislature passed, the UNC is not magically worse than the previous government. It's similar levels of uninspiring, agenda-laden, ineffectual pieces of legislature. Like I said, they passed a stand your ground law. What has that changed? How does that help you in your everyday life? How does that help you if you are a victim of crime? Tell me, because according to the Commissioner of Police, at least with regards to one individual, this is the justification he gave, and the implication is this is something that is applied to everybody, because he didn't say, well, this only applies to you. According to the Commissioner of Police, we have to survive the home invasion before we can get a gun to fight off the second home invasion. That's the implication of the justification he gave to one individual. So, all of the legislation that is coming down the pipe for whatever, what is the effect outside of increasing taxes and fines? What is the positive change that we've seen? We haven't even seen road paving. Ain't that some? Our politics has reached the point now where fixing the roads at the last minute or as you come into office, that's not even a thing. We don't even have money for that anymore. And this whole drag and gas thing, I guess it makes you wonder what really and truly is the level of sophistication with regards to dealing with foreign nations in order to advance our foreign policy agenda to the betterment of the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. Because I'll say this, our foreign policy position didn't look quite this hollow under the PNM. Now you might disagree with the decisions made, but how they operated didn't seem quite this amateurish. Because we ain't seeing no results, like none. None. I'll still say I have no issue with the Americans' intervention, how they did it. I have no issue with that they intervened. How they did it, that's questionable. But other countries, including now Europe, apparently are using their military against transnational drug cartels. The day of police dealing with transnational crime and military not, that might actually be over. And to be fair, military in Latin America has been fighting against drug cartels for quite some time. We just want to be a naive region of naive fools that want to live in an ideal world that doesn't exist. So there's parts of what the Prime Minister does, I'm not going to say I disagree with her, but all of this gun talk for no gain, all of this Kamala 2.0 persona is far from a genuine persona. Because what we get is not a reality grounded on principles by which we could say, yes, we agree with those principles and that's how we want the country to run. No, what we get is a presentation, a facsimile of what is thought that we want to see, giving us what they think we want to hear, not having any sort of criteria or proper strategy or thought process to determine not what we want to hear, but what we actually need. The PNM did it too, they were just more subtle with it. And I think they had some limits, and those limits served them well, because for part of their time, it kept them from going too far. Not all the time, not in all things, obviously, but you get what you pay for. All right, we're over time, so let's end things there. Thanks to the callers, thanks to the commenters for contributing to the show today. Again, let me be frank. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a state of emergency. I am frightened of the murder rate going back up. I am. It's not that I want to see the SOE come to an end immediately. I want to see the crime plan to be put in place to take advantage of the situation now before it's too late. Because if the SOE does come to an end, we will be unpleasantly surprised sooner or later with where crime is going to go and our inability to deal with it properly, normally. consistently. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Stay safe. Don't forget, it's nice to be nice. I will admit I wasn't necessarily nice to the government, but my frustrations this morning was at a boiling point. If I failed to do so, I apologize, but in your criticisms, try not to make it personal, and I probably did fail at least in one situation, but you know what? I'm not going to apologize for that specifically. That said, have a good day, and we will see each other tomorrow to close out the week. Bye-bye.
WESN